AI is raising some unique issues when it comes to intellectual property. For example, what we're seeing a lot of days is that AI is being used to generate new intellectual property, new things of value. For example, AI can be used in drug discovery and identify compounds. AI is creating creative content. And our laws have not really caught up to answer the questions of if AI is used to generate new things of value that we would typically associate with intellectual property. Is that output entitled to intellectual property protection? AI has evolved so much faster than the laws, and businesses need to know that policymakers are feverishly sprinting to catch up. And we're seeing this play out globally in several ways. First, in some jurisdictions, such as the EU and the US, we're seeing new AI legal requirements imposed. Second, there's been a real uptick in enforcement actions pertaining to AI, ranging from issues such as data scraping, allegations that AI is discriminating against protected people, and consumer protection issues. Third, we're seeing AI policies and laws evolve through procurement practices. We're seeing it evolve through standards and through other means. So, the bottom line is that businesses need to pay attention to the quickly evolving AI legal landscape, not only to avoid reputational harm and legal liability, but trusted artificial intelligence products, services, and offerings make good business sense. Well, I think it starts with the AI ethics and data governance that I talked about and by design. And I think it really involves, building upon the multidisciplinary team. What I'd add here is that it really requires a constant attention throughout the entire life cycle. Like, for example, if you're thinking about deploying AI within your organization, you want to think about beforehand, what are the risks? What steps can you take to mitigate the risks? What are the benefits you're trying to capture? And think about that in the initial deployment stage and make sure that that's carried throughout the entire life cycle through deployment and implementation. And the same thing goes on the design cycle. When you're designing the product, you want your technical team, you want your business team to be thinking up front, what are the legal issues we need to think about? What are the ethical issues? We need to think about sustainability, which is a really important part of my work as well. And you need to factor that into the design and make sure that that's carried throughout the development, the deployment, and then the final retirement life cycle. And it really does take a governance structure. It takes vigilance, but it can be done. I've seen it done, and I think it's worth doing because, like I said, good ethical products sell, and it also helps reduce a lot of the legal risk. Well, as I said at the outset, what we're seeing is that artificial intelligence has evolved so much faster than the law, and intellectual property laws are no exception. I mean, first of all, companies want intellectual property oftentimes because it's a big revenue generator. So, from a business perspective, it's very important. Also, they want to avoid infringing third party intellectual property because if they infringe third party IP, whether we're talking about patent portfolios, whether we're talking about content, we're talking about brands, it could result in big liability, as can the misappropriation of trade secrets. So, intellectual property always has been important from a business perspective, even before AI became really popular. AI is raising some unique issues when it comes to intellectual property. For example, what we're seeing a lot of days is that AI is being used to generate new intellectual property, new things of value. For example, AI can be used in drug discovery and identify compounds. AI is creating creative content. And our laws have not really caught up to answer the questions of if AI is used to generate new things of value that we would typically associate with intellectual property. Is that output entitled to intellectual property protection? And what degree of human interaction is necessary to obtain intellectual property protection? And, the laws also are not particularly clear, well, particularly when you have complex value chains on, if the resulting work is entitled to intellectual property protection, who has rights to it. So a lot of my work, kind of stemming back to my 30 years as a corporate lawyer, is looking at, what tools do we have in our chest today to help provide companies with more certainty around these issues, because laws tend to evolve slowly. And intellectual property, like a lot of issues, is super complicated because not only are the laws perhaps unsettled within a particular jurisdiction, but then when you start looking across jurisdiction, we have lots of different legal regimes. So, like a lot of my work through Global Partnership on AI, building upon my years of practice, is focused on how can we use tools like contracts to try to help address some of the uncertainty that exists in the marketplace today. And the focus of my work at Global Partnership on AI is, how can we try to foster the development of standard contract terms that will make these transactions more predictable and easier, reduce some of the transaction costs. And as our work has highlighted, these standard contract terms also need to be complemented by business codes of conduct and technical tools and education, and of course, supported by good legal frameworks. So, bottom line is intellectual property is very important to businesses. Businesses want to protect it. They want to avoid infringing third-party IP. The laws, in the meantime, particularly the intersection of AI and IP, remain unsettled, but I do see contracts as a tool where parties can try to get a little bit more certainty around some of these issues. And then data scraping is another IP issue as well. It raises a plethora of issues. Companies, AI developers are scraping the internet, third-party websites, social media properties to get data to train AI algorithms. And that's given rise to a whole host of lawsuits and enforcement actions, raising intellectual property, among other issues, privacy, consumer protection issues, and the list goes on. And, one of the questions is, how can standard contract terms potentially help address data scraping practices and put it in a way where parties feel like it's fair, it's legally compliant. And, the hope is thinking about looking at contracts in combination with some of the other tools that I mentioned. So, bottom line, IP is evolving very quickly, or the AI is evolving very quickly, raising a lot of IP issues, and organizations need to be creative about thinking about tools that they can use today in the face of legal uncertainty to try to address some of these issues. I hope audiences take away several things from my public speeches. I mean, first of all, the AI landscape is moving so quickly and it impacts business people, it impacts technical people, and I'm hoping that they can get a working understanding of where the law is today and where it is going, and how that should impact their work going forward. Second of all, I hope to share with organizations, concrete tips on how they can actually implement AI and data governance in practice. There's a lot of talk out there about the need to do it, but I have a lot of experience actually converting those principles to practice and sharing some of those insights. And then third, my work covers a myriad of other issues. We've talked a little bit about intellectual property. I've done work at the intersection of AI and privacy. I've done a lot of work on, AI and climate change and looking at the intersection with sustainability. I've also done a lot of work on, AI and public procurement and looking at sector specific applications. And that puts me in a position that if there's a particular audience that wants to talk about a specific issue, and I do this a lot with different organizations, I've got the ability to go in and really tailor a talk to the needs of that audience. And I'm also used to, both from all my experiences working in private practice and dealing with large companies as well as entrepreneurs, my work in the policy space that brings together multidisciplinary experts, and working with just students at the university across schools. I know how to tailor my talks to different audiences. Sometimes when you're talking to a legal audience, they want you to get very technical from a legal side, and I've got the ability to be able to address it at that level. But oftentimes, business people um, engineers, people outside the legal field want to have the presentation in very understandable terms. And I'm also able to tailor the presentation for those audiences as well. So, bottom line is I'm a counselor, I'm a strategic advisor, I'm an educator, and I approach my talks about looking at the audience and looking at their needs and trying to take the wealth of knowledge that I have and really trying to gear the talk to their particular interests.